doesn't suspect a thing. Such a fool.
Now I know. That's all I need.
The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers and clattered onto the garage floor at exactly 11:47 p.m. when I heard my wife's voice drift through the kitchen window above me. "You don't get to have an opinion about what I do because you're not my dad or my owner." I froze under the hood of my battered Honda Civic, engine oil dripping steadily onto my forehead. 23 years of marriage, and Marta had never spoken to me like that. Heck, she'd never spoken to anyone like that. The venom in her voice could have stripped paint. Guess that makes me the family dog, I thought bitterly. I should have peed on her shoes years ago. I wiped my hands on an old rag and crept closer to the window, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see Marta pacing our kitchen in her silk pajamas, phone pressed to her ear, her free hand gesturing wildly. "Jake, I told you, he doesn't suspect anything. He's too busy with his pathetic little accounting business to notice what's happening right under his nose." Jake. The name hit me like a sucker punch to the gut. Jake Morrison, creative director at Pinnacle Advertising, where Marta worked as an account executive. Jake with his perfect teeth and his BMW and his condo overlooking the river. Jake, who'd been coming to our barbecues for 3 years, slapping me on the back and calling me buddy, while apparently screwing my wife behind my back. "No, David won't find out," Marta continued, laughing at something Jake said. "He's working late again tonight, probably crying over his spreadsheets. God, sometimes I wonder what I ever saw in him." The garage walls seemed to close in around me. "David, that's me. David Chen. No, wait. That name's forbidden in my head for some reason. David Sullivan. 49 years old, 5'10", graying at the temples, owner of Sullivan and Associates Tax Services. A man so boring that his own wife had to seek excitement elsewhere. I stumbled backward, knocking over a can of motor oil. It rolled across the concrete floor, making a sound like thunder in the suffocating silence. Marta's voice stopped abruptly. "What was that?" she whispered into the phone. I held my breath, pressed against the cold garage wall, waiting. After what felt like an eternity, her conversation resumed. "It's nothing. Probably just the neighbor's cat again. Listen, about tomorrow night. Tomorrow night. Our 23rd wedding anniversary. I'd made reservations at Romano's, the Italian place where we'd had our first date back in college. I'd even bought her a necklace, a delicate silver chain with a small diamond pendant that had cost me 3 months of grocery money. "I can't wait to see you either," Marta purred into the phone. "David thinks I'm going to some work conference in Vegas with the girls. He's so gullible. It's almost sad." Vegas. She'd told me it was a mandatory team-building retreat. Said she'd rather spend our anniversary at home but couldn't get out of it. I'd actually felt sorry for her. Told her we could celebrate when she got back. The phone call ended, and I heard Marta's footsteps on the stairs. I waited another 10 minutes before creeping back into the house, my legs shaky and my mind reeling. The kitchen still smelled like her perfume, that expensive stuff she'd started wearing 6 months ago. The same perfume I'd stupidly assumed was a gift from her sister. Our bedroom was dark when I finally made it upstairs. Marta was already under the covers, her breathing deep and regular. Or at least she was pretending to sleep. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, studying the woman I'd loved since I was 26 years old. In the dim light from the hallway, she looked almost like a stranger. I changed clothes in the bathroom, catching a glimpse of myself in the mirror. When had I gotten so old? When had the laugh lines around my eyes turned into permanent creases? When had my hair started thinning at the crown? Sleep was impossible. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to Marta's breathing, and wondering how long this had been going on. How many lies had she told? How many times had she looked me in the eye and smiled while planning to meet her lover? At 3 a.m., I gave up and went downstairs to my home office. I needed to think, to plan, to figure out what the heck I was going to do with this information. But first, I needed proof. Real, concrete evidence that couldn't be explained away or denied. I fired up my laptop and opened our shared cell phone account. Marta's call log stretched back 3 months, and Jake's number appeared with disturbing frequency. Late-night calls, early morning texts, conversations that lasted for hours while I was at work. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the data. There it was, laid out in cold, digital clarity. My marriage was a lie. The front door slammed upstairs, and I quickly closed the laptop. Footsteps on the hardwood floor, the jingle of keys being dropped on the kitchen counter. Marta was up early, probably getting ready for her work conference. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step feeling like a mile. She was in the kitchen, dressed in a sharp business suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek bun. She looked beautiful, professional, completely untouchable. "Morning," she said without looking up from her phone. "I'm leaving for the airport in 20 minutes. The Uber's already on its way. Have a good trip," I managed to say. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. She glanced at me then, and for just a moment I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt? Regret? But it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "We'll celebrate our anniversary when I get back, okay? I promise I'll make it up to you." I nodded, not trusting my voice. She grabbed her suitcase and headed for the door, pausing only to give me a quick peck on the cheek. Her lips were cold. "Love you," she called over her shoulder. The door closed with a soft click, and I was alone with the wreckage of my life. I poured myself a cup of coffee with hands that wouldn't stop shaking and tried to figure out my next move. Part of me wanted to call Jake right now, to scream at him, to demand an explanation. But a bigger part, the part that had been quietly calculating profit margins and tax deductions for 25 years, knew that would be a mistake. If I was going to war, I needed intelligence first. I grabbed my keys and headed for the garage. The Honda started on the third try, coughing and wheezing like an old man with emphonia. As I backed out of the driveway, I caught sight of Mrs. Geller, our neighbor, peeking through her curtains. The woman was a one-person surveillance system, always watching, always gossiping. For the first time in years, I was grateful for her nosiness. Jake's condo was a 20-minute drive across town, in one of those gleaming high-rise buildings that had sprouted up during the tech boom. I parked across the street and waited, feeling like a character in one of those detective shows Marta used to love watching. At 9:15, a familiar figure emerged from the building's lobby. Marta, still in her business suit, but now she was laughing at something on her phone. She looked happier than I'd seen her in months. Jake appeared a moment later, jogging to catch up with her. He was tall, probably 6'2", with the kind of effortless good looks that made other men feel inadequate. He caught Marta around the waist and spun her in a circle, right there on the sidewalk like they were teenagers in love. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. They were supposed to be discreet, weren't they? Wasn't that how affairs worked? But here they were, acting like a couple, completely oblivious to the world around them. Jake's BMW was parked in the building's garage, but I could see it through the glass doors. Sleek, black, probably worth more than I made in a year. A thought began to form in my mind, dark and satisfying. I waited until they disappeared around the corner, probably heading to some cozy cafe for breakfast. Then I got out of my car and walked casually toward the garage entrance. The security guard was reading a newspaper and barely glanced up as I passed. Jake's car was parked in space 47, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I pulled a key from my pocket, not my car key, but the old house key I'd been meaning to throw away for months, and dragged it along the driver's side door. The sound was horrible, like fingernails on a chalkboard, but the long, jagged scratch it left behind was beautiful. I was fishing a pen out of my jacket pocket when I heard footsteps echoing in the garage. My heart hammered as I quickly scrawled, "Welcome home, homewrecker," on a scrap of paper and tucked it under the windshield wiper. The footsteps were getting closer. I turned to leave and froze. A security camera mounted on the wall was pointed directly at me, its red light blinking steadily. I'd been seen. I made it back to my car in what felt like record time, my pulse pounding in my ears like a war drum. The security camera had captured everything. My face, my license plate, probably even the key in my hand. In about 10 minutes, Jake would discover his vandalized BMW and the note, and shortly after that, the police would be knocking on my door. What the heck had I been thinking? I drove home in a daze, already composing my confession in my head. "Yes, officer." I keyed my wife's lover's car. "No, I don't regret it. Yes, I understand I'll have to pay for the damages." But hours passed, and no police came. My phone didn't ring. The world continued spinning as if I hadn't just committed my first act of petty vandalism in 49 years of law-abiding life. By evening, I'd almost convinced myself that maybe the camera hadn't been working, or maybe Jake hadn't noticed the damage yet. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stay away from what doesn't belong to you, old man. This is your only warning." I stared at the message for a long time, my hands trembling slightly. Jake had gotten the message all right. and now he was trying to intimidate me. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. He was sleeping with my wife, and he had the nerve to threaten me? I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in my recliner, staring at the family photos on the mantelpiece. Marta and me on our wedding day, both of us young and stupid and convinced we'd be happy forever. Our kids, Ross and Amelia, at various stages of childhood. Christmas mornings, birthday parties, summer vacations. 23 years of memories that now felt like elaborate lies. The bourbon burned going down, but it helped quiet the rage that was building in my chest like a pressure cooker ready to explode. My phone rang at 10:30. Marta's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering, but curiosity won out. "Hey, honey," she said, her voice artificially bright. "Just wanted to let you know I made it to Vegas safely. The hotel is gorgeous." "That's great," I said, proud of how normal I sounded. "How was your flight?" "Oh, you know how it is. Delayed, cramped, the usual. But we're here now, and tomorrow's going to be packed with seminars and workshops. I probably won't be able to call much." Seminars and workshops. Right. More like room service and silk sheets. "Don't worry about it," I told her. "Focus on work. I'll be fine." There was a pause, and I wondered if she could hear the strain in my voice. But when she spoke again, she sounded relieved. "You're the best, David. I don't know what I'd do without you." The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a knife. After she hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, thinking. Jake's threat had been meant to scare me off, to make me crawl back into my hole and pretend I'd never seen anything. But it had the opposite effect. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt truly alive. The rage was still there, burning in my chest, but it was cold now, calculating. They wanted to play games? Fine. But they were about to learn that the boring accountant had a few tricks of his own. The next morning, I drove to Murphy's Tavern, a dive bar on the wrong side of town where I used to grab beers with my old college buddies. The place hadn't changed in 20 years. Same sticky floors, same neon beer signs, same smell of cigarettes and desperation. But it was also the unofficial headquarters of the local gossip network, and right now, information was what I needed. Sam Murphy, the owner, was behind the bar polishing glasses with a rag that had seen better days. He'd been my boxing coach back in high school, before I'd traded gloves for calculators and discovered I had a talent for numbers instead of violence. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Sam said, grinning. "David Sullivan, as I live and breathe. What brings you to my humble establishment at 10 in the morning?" "Just needed to get out of the house," I said, sliding onto a bar stool. "Marta's out of town on business." Ah, the lovely Mrs. Sullivan. How is she these days? Still working at that fancy advertising agency? Still working there, yeah. Seems to love her job more and more lately. Sam's expression shifted slightly, and I caught something in his eyes. Knowledge. The kind of look that said he'd heard things but wasn't sure how much to share. "You know how it is in this town," he said carefully. "People talk. Most of it's nonsense, but sometimes what?" He set down the glass he'd been polishing and leaned forward. "Look, David, we've known each other a long time. You're a good guy, always have been. So I'm going to ask you straight. How are things at home? Really?" The question hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. If Sam was asking, it meant the rumors were already circulating. How long had people been talking about my wife's affair while I remained blissfully ignorant? "That bad, huh?" I said. Sam's face softened. "I'm sorry, buddy. I was hoping you already knew. How long?" 6 months, maybe more. Jake Morrison's not exactly discreet about his conquests. Been bragging to anyone who'll listen about his new project at work. Project. That's what I was to them. Marta's boring husband. The obstacle to be overcome. The humiliation burned in my throat like acid. "There's more," Sam continued. "Word is, Marta's been telling people that you two are having problems, that you're difficult to live with. Some folks are starting to think she's justified in looking elsewhere." I gripped my beer bottle so tightly I was surprised it didn't shatter. "Difficult to live with." "I don't believe it for a second," Sam said quickly. "But you know how these things go. The story gets out ahead of the truth, and before you know it, everyone's taking sides." I drained my beer in one long pull and stood up. "Thanks for the heads up, Sam." "David, wait. Whatever you're thinking of doing." "I'm thinking of going home and mowing my lawn," I lied. "Maybe organizing my sock drawer. You know, difficult husband stuff." But as I walked to my car, my mind was already spinning with possibilities. Marta wasn't just cheating on me. She was destroying my reputation, turning me into the villain in her little love story, making sure that when the truth came out, everyone would be on her side. Well, two could play that game. My first stop was the bank. I transferred half of our joint savings account into a new account in my name only. Perfectly legal, since it was my money too. Then I moved my business accounts to a different bank entirely, just to be safe. Next, I drove to Pinnacle Advertising. The building was all glass and steel, the kind of place that screamed, "We're more important than you." I'd been there exactly twice. Once for Marta's Christmas party, and once to pick her up when her car was in the shop. Both times, I'd felt like a fish out of water among all the beautiful, creative people in their expensive clothes. Today, I didn't go inside. Instead, I sat in my car and watched the employees come and go, learning their patterns, their faces. Knowledge was power, and I was building an arsenal. Jake emerged at 12:30, probably heading to lunch. He walked with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. That was about to change. I followed him to a trendy bistro downtown, the kind of place where a sandwich cost $20 and came with a side of pretension. He met another man there, tall, thin, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my car. They sat at a table by the window, and I could see them laughing and talking animatedly. I parked across the street and used my phone to take a few pictures. Not because I had a plan for them yet, but because information was currency, and I was collecting as much as I could. My phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. I meant what I said, back off, or you'll regret it. This time I texted back, looking forward to it. The response was immediate. You have no idea who you're messing with. I almost laughed out loud. He was right. I had no idea who I was messing with. But more importantly, he had no idea who he was messing with either. The boring accountant was dead. In his place stood someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. Someone with nothing left to lose. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It crept up on me like a slow poison, seeping into my thoughts and dreams until I barely recognized the man staring back at me from the bathroom mirror each morning. 3 days after Marta's return from her fake Vegas trip, I was sitting in my home office when I heard her on the phone again. This time she wasn't even trying to be discreet. I know it's risky, but David's been so distant lately, she was saying. I think he's finally getting the hint that this marriage is over. Getting the hint? As if I was some slow student who needed extra time to understand the lesson. I crept to the kitchen doorway and watched her pacing by the window, twirling a strand of hair around her finger like a teenager. She was wearing the necklace I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she'd barely glanced at when I gave it to her. No, I haven't talked to him about divorce yet, she continued. I want to make sure all my ducks are in a row first. You know how vindictive men can get when their egos are bruised. Vindictive. The word echoed in my head like a prophecy. Victoria thinks I should wait until after the Henderson account is finalized. She says timing is everything in these situations. Victoria, Marta's best friend since college, the self-appointed queen bee of their social circle, a woman who collected other people's secrets like some people collected stamps, always ready to deploy them at the most advantageous moment. I'd never liked Victoria, with her fake smile and her passive-aggressive comments disguised as concern. Now I was beginning to understand why. After Marta hung up, I retreated to my office and opened my laptop. If Victoria was involved in orchestrating my wife's affair, I needed to know more about her. Social media was a beautiful thing for someone with my particular skill set. People shared their entire lives online, completely oblivious to how much information they were giving away. Victoria's Facebook profile was a masterclass in manufactured perfection. Designer handbags, expensive dinners, exotic vacations, all funded by her husband Marcus, a successful real estate developer who apparently traveled for business more often than he was home. But it was her Instagram that told the real story. Hidden among the carefully curated lifestyle photos were glimpses of something darker. Bills scattered on her kitchen counter, a foreclosure notice partially visible in the background of a selfie, a post about temporary financial setbacks that had been quickly deleted, but not before I'd screenshotted it. Victoria wasn't just Marta's friend. She was drowning in debt and looking for a way out. And what better way than to help orchestrate a divorce that would leave Marta with half of everything I'd worked for? The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed made my blood run cold. I spent the next week gathering intelligence. I learned that Jake had been married twice before, both marriages ending in expensive divorces. I discovered that Victoria's husband was indeed having an affair of his own, with his 25-year-old assistant, no less. I found out that Marta had been taking extended lunch breaks 3 times a week, always on the days when Jake's calendar showed he was working from home. But the most interesting discovery came from an unexpected source, my own daughter. Amelia was home from college for spring break, and she'd been unusually quiet since arriving. She spent most of her time in her room, only emerging for meals and the occasional trip to see friends. I'd assumed she was just being a typical 20-year-old, but something in her demeanor suggested otherwise. I found her in the kitchen at midnight, staring into the refrigerator like it might contain the answers to life's mysteries. "Can't sleep?" I asked. She jumped, startled. "Dad, you scared me." "Sorry. Want to talk about what's keeping you up?" She closed the refrigerator door and turned to face me. In the dim light, she looked younger than her 20 years, but her eyes held a weight that hadn't been there at Christmas. "It's nothing," she said, "just college stress." "Amelia," I kept my voice gentle but firm. "I've been your father for 20 years. I know when something's bothering you." She was quiet for a long moment, and I could see her wrestling with some internal debate. Finally, she sighed and slumped against the counter. "I know about Mom," she said quietly. The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you know?" "About her and Jake. About the affair I've known for months." I felt like the ground was shifting beneath my feet. "How?" "Instagram." She pulled out her phone and showed me a private account I'd never seen before. "Mom doesn't know I have this account. I use it to keep track of things. I saw them together at that new restaurant downtown back in December. They were holding hands, kissing. I took pictures. The photos were damning. Marta and Jake in an intimate booth, her hand on his cheek, his lips against her neck. They looked like lovers, completely absorbed in each other, oblivious to the world around them. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Because I hoped it would just go away, because I didn't want to be the one to destroy our family, because—" She took a shaky breath. "Because I was angry at you too." "At me? Why?" "Because you let it happen." The words exploded out of her. "You were so focused on work, so absent, so boring. Mom was dying inside, and you didn't even notice. Part of me thought maybe she deserved to be happy, even if it meant cheating." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had been absent, focused on building my business while my marriage crumbled around me. But that didn't justify what Marta had done. "And now?" I asked. "Now I see what it's doing to you, and I hate it. I hate her for lying. I hate Jake for being a predator. I hate Victoria for encouraging the whole thing. And I hate myself for keeping quiet." Victoria. What does Victoria have to do with this? Amelia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She's been pushing Mom toward divorce for months, telling her she deserves better, that she's still young enough to start over. She even introduced Mom to Jake, set up the whole thing. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Victoria wasn't just enabling Marta's affair, she was orchestrating it. But why? "Dad," Amelia said, "what are you going to do?" I looked at my daughter, this young woman who'd been carrying this burden for months, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "I'm going to make them pay," I said quietly. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to the public library. I needed to use a computer that couldn't be traced back to me for what I was about to do. Victoria's financial situation was even worse than I'd suspected. Her husband Marcus had been funneling money into offshore accounts for months, preparing for his own divorce. Victoria was about to be left with nothing unless she could find another source of income, like a commission from helping a friend secure a lucrative divorce settlement. I created several anonymous email accounts and began my campaign. The first email went to Marcus, containing photos of Victoria having lunch with a divorce attorney. The second went to Jake's ex-wife, letting her know that her former husband was up to his old tricks. The third went to the HR department at Pinnacle Advertising with detailed documentation of Jake and Marta's affair and its potential impact on workplace morale. But the most important email went to Victoria herself. It contained a single line: "I know what you're doing." I sent it from an untraceable account and waited. The response came within an hour. "Who is this?" I typed back, "A friend. Meet me at Murphy's Tavern tonight at 9 p.m. Come alone." That evening, I arrived at the bar early and positioned myself in a corner booth where I could see the entire room. Victoria walked in at exactly 9 p.m., her usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. She scanned the room, clearly unsure who she was meeting. I waited until she'd ordered a drink and was checking her phone anxiously before approaching her table. "Hello, Victoria." She looked up and I saw genuine fear flicker across her face. "David? What are you doing here?" "I think you know." I slid into the booth across from her. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't insult my intelligence. I know about your financial problems. I know about Marcus and his assistant. I know about your little arrangement with Marta and Jake. The only thing I don't know is why you thought you could get away with it." Victoria's composure cracked. "You don't understand. Marcus is going to leave me with nothing. I'll lose the house, the cars, everything. You needed my wife to get divorced so you could collect your finder's fee from Jake. How much was he paying you? 10% of whatever assets Marta walked away with?" She didn't deny it, which was confirmation enough. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice calm and steady. "You're going to call Marta and tell her that pursuing this affair is a mistake. You're going to convince her to end it and try to work on our marriage. And you're going to stay out of our lives permanently." "And if I don't?" I smiled, and something in my expression made her lean back in her seat. "Then I'll make sure Marcus finds out about your little side business. I'll make sure Jake's bosses know he's been using company resources to facilitate his affairs. And I'll make sure everyone in your precious social circle knows exactly what kind of person you really are." Victoria stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her calculating the odds. Finally, she nodded. "Good," I said, standing up. "Oh, and Victoria, if you ever try to manipulate my family again, you'll discover that boring accountants can be very creative when properly motivated." I left her sitting there, staring into her drink, and walked out into the night air. The first phase of my plan was complete. But I was just getting started. Victoria kept her word, at least partially. Over the next week, I noticed a subtle shift in Marta's behavior. She seemed more conflicted, less certain about her choices. Her phone calls with Jake became shorter and more tense. She even suggested we have dinner together one evening, the first time she'd initiated any kind of couple activity in months. But it was too little, too late. The damage was done, and I was no longer interested in salvaging what was left of our marriage. I wanted justice. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. Pinnacle Advertising was hosting their annual Client Appreciation Gala at the Grand Ballroom downtown, a black tie affair designed to showcase the agency's success and schmooze potential clients. Marta had mentioned it in passing, assuming I wouldn't be interested in attending. She was wrong. I rented a tuxedo and bought a ticket through a business contact who worked with one of Pinnacle's clients. When Marta saw me walk into the ballroom that Saturday night, her face went white. "David, what are you doing here?" "Supporting my wife's career," I said, straightening my bow tie. "Isn't that what good husbands do?" The ballroom was filled with the usual crowd of advertising executives, clients, and hangers-on, all trying to outdress and out-impress each other. I spotted Jake across the room, resplendent in what was probably a $1,000 tuxedo, holding court with a group of younger employees who hung on his every word. He hadn't seen me yet. "I think I should introduce myself to your colleagues," I told Marta. "We've been married 23 years, and I barely know the people you work with." "David, please," she said, grabbing my arm. "This isn't the time or place." "For what? For meeting my wife's friends? For celebrating her success?" I smiled, but there was nothing warm about it. "I'm just being supportive." I made my way through the crowd, shaking hands and making small talk with Marta's coworkers. Most of them seemed surprised to meet me. Apparently, Marta rarely mentioned having a husband. That was about to change. "You must be so proud of Marta," said a young woman from the creative department. "She's been working so hard lately, staying late, coming in on weekends?" "Oh yes," I replied. "She's very dedicated to her work, very hands-on with her projects." The woman nodded enthusiastically, completely missing the double meaning. But I noticed Marta flinch from across the room. I was working my way toward Jake when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned to find a tall, distinguished man with silver hair and an expensive smile. "You must be David Sullivan," he said. "I'm Richard Blackwood, Pinnacle's CEO. I've heard so much about you." This was unexpected. "All good things, I hope." "Well, that depends on your perspective." His smile didn't waver, but his eyes were cold. "I understand you've been making some rather serious accusations about my employees." "The HR complaint. Someone had connected it back to me." "I simply reported what I observed," I said calmly. Workplace relationships can create liability issues, as I'm sure you're aware. Indeed, they can. They can also destroy careers and reputations based on nothing more than speculation and jealousy. The conversation was drawing attention. I could see people turning to look at us, sensing drama in the air like sharks smelling blood. Mr. Blackwood, I said, raising my voice just enough to be heard by the surrounding crowd, are you suggesting that your company tolerates adultery among its employees? Because I have to say, that's a fascinating HR policy. The word adultery cut through the ambient chatter like a knife. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. In the space of 10 seconds, we'd become the center of attention. Blackwood's face reddened. Mr. Sullivan, I think you should leave. Why? Because I'm asking uncomfortable questions? Because I'm disrupting the carefully crafted image you've built here? I gestured around the room. These people deserve to know what kind of company they're doing business with. Security, Blackwood called. But before the security guards could reach us, Jake Morrison stepped forward. He'd finally noticed the commotion and come to investigate. What's going on here? He asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being in charge. Jake, I said, turning to face him with a smile. Perfect timing. I was just telling Mr. Blackwood about your extracurricular activities with my wife. The room went dead silent. Jake's face cycled through several emotions, surprise, fear, anger, before settling on indignation. You're out of line, he said, and you're embarrassing yourself. Am I? Because from where I stand, you're the one who should be embarrassed. Sleeping with another man's wife, using company resources to facilitate your affair, bragging about your conquests to anyone who'll listen. That's enough! Jake stepped closer, his hands clenched into fists. You need to shut your mouth right now. Or what? You'll hit me? In front of all these witnesses? I laughed, and the sound was harsh in the silent ballroom. Please, Jake, give me a reason. For a moment, I thought he might actually do it. His face was flushed with anger, and I could see the muscles in his jaw working. But then his gaze swept the room, taking in the dozens of phones pointed in our direction, and his survival instincts kicked in. You're pathetic, he said instead. No wonder Marta needed to find someone else. That was the wrong thing to say. I'd been holding myself in check, playing the role of the wronged husband seeking justice. But Jake's words flipped a switch somewhere deep inside me, and suddenly I wasn't thinking about consequences or public perception or anything else except the satisfaction of wiping that smug expression off his face. I hit him. Not a wild, emotional swing, but a precise, calculated punch that drew on muscle memory from my high school boxing days. My fist connected with his jaw with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon, and Jake went down hard. The room erupted. People screamed, phones flashed, security guards rushed forward, but I barely noticed any of it. I was standing over Jake's prone form, my knuckles throbbing, feeling more alive than I had in years. David! Marta appeared at my side, her face a mask of horror. What have you done? What you should have done months ago, I said. I ended it. The security guards reached us then, but I didn't resist as they escorted me toward the exit. I'd accomplished what I came here to do. By tomorrow morning, the video of me punching Jake would be all over social media. Everyone in town would know about the affair, about Jake's predatory behavior, about Marta's lies. Their reputations were in ruins. But as I was led through the lobby, I realized this was just the beginning. The public humiliation was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to lose everything that mattered to them. I wanted them to feel the way I'd felt that night in the garage, listening to my wife plan my destruction. The police were waiting outside. They arrested me for assault, which I'd expected. What I hadn't expected was the crowd of people who'd followed us out of the ballroom, their phones still recording, shouting questions and comments. Is it true your wife was cheating? How long has this been going on? Are you getting divorced? I smiled as they put me in the back of the police car. Let them ask their questions. Let them speculate and gossip and spread the story far and wide. Every person who heard about tonight would know that Marta Sullivan was an adulteress and Jake Morrison was a homewrecker. The damage to their reputations would spread like a virus through social media, destroying everything they'd worked to build. And this was only the first phase of my revenge. I spent exactly 4 hours in jail before my lawyer, Tom Bradley, bailed me out. Tom had been handling my business legal needs for years, and while he specialized in tax law rather than criminal defense, he was competent enough to get the assault charges reduced to a misdemeanor with community service. You're lucky Jake didn't press for more serious charges, Tom said as we walked out of the police station. Though from what I'm hearing, he's got bigger problems to worry about right now. What kind of problems? The kind that happen when videos of you getting knocked out by an angry husband who caught you with his wife go viral. Last I checked, it had over 2 million views on TikTok. 2 million views. The number was staggering, but also deeply satisfying. Jake's humiliation was now a permanent part of internet history. There's more, Tom continued. Pinnacle Advertising put both Jake and your wife on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. Something about inappropriate workplace relationships and potential harassment claims from other female employees. That was faster than I'd expected, but not surprising. Companies move quickly to protect themselves when scandals threatened their bottom line. My phone had been buzzing constantly since Tom picked me up. Text messages, voicemails, social media notifications. Everyone wanted to know my side of the story, but the most interesting message came from an unexpected source. Marcus Webb, Victoria's husband. We need to talk. Meet me at the Marriott bar on 5th Street. 1 hour. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won out. Marcus was a successful businessman with connections throughout the city. If he wanted to meet, it probably meant Victoria had told him about our conversation at Murphy's Tavern. The Marriott bar was upscale and dimly lit, the kind of place where wealthy men conducted business over expensive whiskey. Marcus was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a tumbler of something amber in front of him. He looked older than his 55 years, with deep lines around his eyes and gray stubble that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. When he saw me approaching, he gestured to the empty seat across from him. David, thanks for coming. I sat down and studied his face. Victoria told you about our conversation. She told me a lot of things, including the fact that she's been orchestrating your wife's affair for months. He took a sip of his drink. I have to admit I'm impressed. You figured out her game faster than I expected. You knew? I suspected. Victoria's not as clever as she thinks she is, and she's been desperate for money ever since she found out about my extracurricular activities. He smiled ruefully. Turns out we've both been keeping secrets. So what do you want from me? Marcus leaned forward. I want to make you an offer. Victoria's been a thorn in both our sides, and I think it's time she faced some consequences for her actions. I'm prepared to provide you with information that could be very useful in your campaign. What kind of information? He pulled out a manila folder and slid it across the table. Financial records, bank statements, email correspondence. Everything you need to prove that Victoria was being paid to break up your marriage. I opened the folder and scanned the contents. It was a treasure trove of evidence. Wire transfers from Jake to Victoria. Detailed emails discussing strategy. Even recordings of phone conversations where Victoria coached Marta on how to hide the affair. Why are you giving me this? Because Victoria made a mistake when she decided to play games with other people's lives. She thought she was so smart, manipulating everyone around her for her own benefit, but she forgot that I didn't get where I am by being naive. Marcus finished his drink and stood up. Use that information however you see fit. Just remember, Victoria brought this on herself. After he left, I sat in the bar for another hour, studying the documents he'd given me. The scope of Victoria's manipulation was breathtaking. She hadn't just introduced Marta to Jake. She'd been coaching their affair from the beginning, providing alibis, suggesting meeting places, even helping Marta practice lies to tell me. But more importantly, the documents revealed something I hadn't known. Victoria had been skimming money from several of her friends' divorce proceedings, taking kickbacks from lawyers and financial advisors in exchange for referrals. Marta wasn't her first victim. She was part of a pattern. This changed everything. I drove home to find Marta's car in the driveway. She was sitting at the kitchen table, still wearing the black dress from the gala, her makeup smeared and her hair disheveled. She looked up when I walked in, and I saw a mixture of anger, fear, and something that might have been regret in her eyes. We need to talk, she said. Yes, we do. I sat down across from her and placed Marcus's folder on the table between us. But first, I think you should see this. She opened the folder and began reading. I watched her face as the truth sank in. The realization that Victoria had been manipulating her, using her, profiting from the destruction of our marriage. Oh my God, she whispered. She planned all of this. From the beginning, Jake was paying her a commission based on how much money you walked away with in the divorce. You were never his girlfriend, Marta. You were a business transaction. Tears started flowing down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, David. I never meant for any of this to happen. I was confused, and Victoria kept telling me I deserved better, and Jake made me feel young and wanted again. Stop. I held up a hand. I don't want to hear your excuses. What I want to know is what you're going to do now. She wiped her eyes with a napkin. What do you mean? I mean, you have a choice to make. You can continue down this path, get divorced, let Victoria and Jake profit from destroying our family, or you can help me make them pay for what they've done. Marta stared at me for a long moment. What are you asking me to do? I leaned forward, and when I spoke, my voice was cold and steady. I am asking you to choose a side, theirs or mine, because tomorrow I'm going to war and I want to know if you're with me or against me. She was quiet for several minutes, staring down at the documents spread across the table. When she finally looked up, there was something different in her eyes, something harder. What do you need me to do? The next morning, I put the final phase of my plan into motion. First, I sent copies of Victoria's financial records to the IRS, the State Attorney General's office, and the Bar Association. Her scheme to profit from divorce proceedings was illegal on multiple levels, and she was about to discover that the government took a dim view of unreported income and financial fraud. Second, I used my business connections to spread word about Jake's predatory behavior throughout the advertising industry. By noon, 3 other women had come forward with stories of harassment and inappropriate advances. His career was effectively over. But the masterstroke came that evening. I'd spent weeks planning it, using my knowledge of social media and small-town gossip networks to maximum effect. At exactly 7 p.m., during the peak of social media activity, I launched what I privately called the Devastation Protocol. It started with a Facebook post on my personal account, a detailed, carefully worded explanation of everything that had happened, complete with documentation and evidence. I tagged everyone I could think of: friends, family, co-workers, neighbors, local business owners. Within minutes, the post was being shared across the city. Then Marta posted her own statement, confirming my account and expressing remorse for her actions. Amelia shared both posts with her own commentary about the importance of truth and accountability. But the real genius was what happened next. I'd spent weeks cultivating relationships with local bloggers, social media influencers, and gossip columnists. I'd provided them with exclusive details, insider information, and advance copies of the most damaging documents. When my Facebook post went live, they were ready with their own content. Within 2 hours, the story was trending on Twitter. Local news stations were picking it up. The video of me punching Jake was being shared alongside detailed explanations of why I'd done it. Victoria, Jake, and everyone who'd enabled them were being systematically destroyed in the court of public opinion. My phone rang at 9 p.m. Victoria's number appeared on the screen. "You son of a witch!" she screamed when I answered. "You've ruined everything! My marriage, my reputation, my business. You ruined those things yourself," I said calmly. "I just made sure everyone knew about it. This isn't over. I'll sue you for defamation, for invasion of privacy. With what money and what lawyer? Because from what I hear, you're about to be very busy dealing with federal fraud charges." The line went quiet for a moment. When Victoria spoke again, her voice was smaller, more desperate. "What do you want? Money? I'll pay you whatever." "I don't want your money, Victoria. I want you to understand something. Actions have consequences. You spent months manipulating and destroying people's lives for profit. Now you get to live with the results." I hung up and turned off my phone. Outside, I could see neighbors gathering in small groups, no doubt discussing the drama that had exploded across their social media feeds. Mrs. Geller was practically vibrating with excitement, probably preparing to hold court with her own version of events. Marta appeared in the doorway, looking exhausted, but oddly relieved. "It's done?" she asked. "It's done," she nodded and sat down beside me. "What happens now?" I looked at my wife, this woman I'd loved and hated and forgiven and condemned over the past few weeks, and realized I didn't have an answer to that question. "Now we figure out if there's anything left worth saving," I said. But even as I spoke the words, I knew the truth. The man who'd sat in this same chair a month ago, crying over his wife's betrayal and wondering how to win her back, was gone. In his place sat someone harder, colder, more calculating. Someone who discovered that revenge was a dish best served with precision, patience, and a complete disregard for collateral damage. Victoria was facing federal charges. Jake was unemployed and unemployable. Their reputations were in ruins. their futures uncertain, and I was the one who'd orchestrated it all. The boring accountant was dead. Long live the villain.